This 2-year-old girl got eaten alive by crocodiles, and this is a massive trigger warning.
Okay, so this happened at a farm in Cambodia, and the child's name is Rome Wraith Neri, who was just a 2-year-old girl. While her mother was occupied with a newborn child, Rome wandered and was playing unsupervised, and managed to pass over a fence which should have protected her from the side of the crocodiles. The family, having a farm, also had a ground for crocodiles, since it's a very profitable business in Cambodia. But sadly, the little girl was able to somehow pass over the fence and ended up being eaten alive and devoured by the crocodiles. The parents discovered the awful scene when the father came home from work and found the skull of his 2-year-old daughter. A passerby had also taken a video of the gruesome scene, but I really don't recommend looking it up. And the only thing left of the 2-year-old girl was her skull that the parents retrieved. This is just so sad and awful, and it kind of reminds me of that case in Florida when the elderly woman was walking her dog and she tripped next to a pond and was eaten alive by a crocodile. Now, there's many questions surrounding the case of Rome, like why wasn't the area of the crocodiles more secure? And why would you let a 2-year-old girl out on her own with 60 crocodiles on the property? Either way, nobody wanted this to happen, and it's honestly just an extremely tragic accident. I can't imagine the pain the parents were feeling, and may Rome rest in peace.
This is by far one of the worst ways somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the video.
This is the most disturbing sporting accident I ever came across. On January 19th, 1991, the Lamberthorn race was cancelled due to a horrible skiing accident. Gernot Rangstandler, who was a 20-year-old contestant, was going downhill at full speed when he suddenly lost control as he was approaching the finish line. And he then slammed head-on into safety nets at extremely high speeds. This then trapped one of his skis inside the net, which resulted in his right leg almost being completely torn off. He also fractured his pelvis and was literally ripped in half. The impact caused serious internal injuries, fractures, and nerve damages. He was then transported by a helicopter to a hospital in Switzerland, where he received several blood transfusions, but despite receiving numerous blood transfusions, both during and after the operation, he later passed away from severe pelvic bleeding. The video is extremely graphic, and I'll explain it to you right now. In the video, you see Gernot going down a ski mountain when he suddenly goes airborne. He then collides with the safety net mid-air while going full speed, and his body then starts sliding down the mountain, but at this point you immediately notice something is wrong. As his body is spinning out of control, a trail of blood is following him, staining the entire mountain in the process. And at this point, you see a lot of blood, and you also see Gernot almost ripped in half. His body then stops at the bottom of the hill as a pool of blood forms around him and people come to help. This video is just awful because it's one of those things that you can't imagine ever happening, but it does. How does a safety net rip somebody's body in half? It's just honestly insane, and please don't look up the video because it's extremely disturbing.
This is by far the saddest and most disturbing thing ever live streamed.
Coran Harvey, a 14-year-old boy, tragically lost his life in a heartbreaking incident. He was one of 2 young cousins who were live streaming on Instagram from an apartment bathroom in St. Louis. During this ill-fated moment, Paris Harvey, a 12-year-old girl, accidentally shot Coran before turning the gun on herself. The family believes it was a freak accident, and after seeing the video, it certainly looks like that. Both Coran and Paris were extremely close, often making videos and sharing pranks. Paris, a 7th grader, was known for her humor and love for getting her hair and nails done. And Coran, an 8th grader, was a goofy kid who could perform impressive backflips. And their lives were cut short in a moment of youthful curiosity and misjudgment. The 2 young kids were making a video on Instagram Live in which they were playing with a gun, when Paris accidentally shot Coran in the back of the head, killing him. And in a moment of panic and complete fear, Paris picked up the gun and turned it on herself. And you see all of this happen live in the live stream. After this happens, the other family members in the apartment run over to the bathroom and try and get in. But the door is being blocked by the bodies of the 2 young kids. The family members begin to freak out after realizing what just happened. The parents had no idea that the kids had the gun, and it's not clear where the gun came from. I don't recommend looking up this video for obvious reasons, and it's just something you really don't want to see. It's extremely sad and very disturbing. This heartbreaking incident serves as a reminder of the importance of gun safety and responsible handling. May Paris and Coran Harvey rest in peace. This is just so heartbreaking.
This man died after being stung by 1,000 bees, and this is definitely one of the worst ways to die.
This is Alex Bessler, and he and one of his friends were on a morning hike in the mountains of Arizona when out of nowhere, a large swarm of hostile bees attacked. Alex, who was 23, was overtaken by the aggressive bees and stung more than 1,000 times, authorities said. Several people attempted to help Alex as he laid on the ground covered in bees, withering in pain and screaming. But every rescuer's attempt was driven back by the angry swarm. The county sheriff sergeant Alan Romer finally used a utility vehicle to get close, and he was able to load Alex onto the UTV and remove him from the scene, still completely covered with bees and the swarm pursuing. This isn't a picture of Alex when he was getting swarmed, but I would imagine this is what he kind of looked like. Alex was then taken to a local hospital where he was sadly pronounced dead. His friend was able to escape the bees and take shelter in a nearby restroom. Sergeant Romer, who was stationed in the area for 16 years, also said, "It was by far the worst bee attack he's ever seen." He was also stung a bunch, but not nearly as much as Alex. I am completely terrified of bees, so this story really freaks me out, and I cannot imagine getting swarmed by more than 1,000 bees and getting stung. This is absolutely awful, and may Alex Bessler rest in peace.
This young man fell into a freezer and got mummified, and this is one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained.
On November 28, 2009, 25-year-old Larry Moncada got into an argument with his parents and stormed out of the house with no shoes or socks on. And it is believed that he went to his work, which is the No Frills supermarket. Now, he was not scheduled to work this day, but his employer said that it's normal for employees to just come and go out of the store. But the thing is, after he entered the store, he was never seen again. That is until 2019 when a construction crew was inside of the store, and they then found something extremely disturbing behind one of the coolers. Now, there's no pictures of the actual store's coolers when this happened, but I would imagine this is what they are referring to. Behind the cooler, they found the decomposed body of Larry Moncada. They first confirmed this by the clothing the corpse had on was the same that Larry had on that day. So they then took DNA samples from both of his parents, and it was a 100% match. So what happened? Okay, so in their store above their coolers was a little bit of open space. And we all know how sometimes people climb on top of the coolers and just walk around on top of it. And people that worked at this store would go on top of the coolers to get a little bit of a break. So what they believed happened was Larry climbed up there, and he then slipped and fell into a crevice from behind the cooler to where the products were sold. There was a very narrow 18-inch passageway that he fell into. And it was roughly a 12-foot fall, which definitely wouldn't have killed him, but it could have injured him. Now the problem is, even if he was screaming, the coolers were so loud that nobody would have heard him. So he was in that little 18-inch gap for God knows how long until he died, and then his body just mummified over the years of being there. I can't even imagine being stuck in this situation. This is straight out of a horror movie. He had maybe enough room to move his head left to right only a couple inches. Customers even complained about a horrific odor coming from behind the coolers. People were thinking maybe the butcher wasn't cleaning up the dry blood, but the staff of the store said no, it's perfectly clean. They did retrieve Larry's body, and he was then laid to rest in 2019. Many people have questions about this case, like for 10 years, no other employee climbed up there to have a break. And did the store have cameras showing that he went there, or showing what happened to him? The store closed in 2016 also, and it was completely abandoned for at least 3 years. This is just such a sad way to die, and I can't imagine the pain and anxiety Larry Moncada was going through. May he rest in peace, and this is just completely awful.
This girl was murdered in one of the most brutal ways I've ever heard, and this case is absolutely chilling.
In Indonesia, a girl was found dead, naked, and covered in her own blood, and had her genitals stuffed with a garden hoe. Her name was Ino Ferreira, a 19-year-old teenager and an employee of a plastic factory. And Ino was unfortunately murdered after 3 men gang raped her at her boarding house. After Ino was absent from work for 3 days, her friends decided to go and visit her. Thinking that she was sick, Ino, who lived alone, didn't return their calls, and her friends were worried. When her friends arrived at the dorm, they found that the door was locked. They then knocked and nobody answered. Feeling suspicious, they decided to inform the security to break down the door. And what they found was an absolute horrific mess. Beneath a pile of clothes and pillows, there was a bed. and there was a human leg sticking out from underneath everything. This is when they found Ino's body gruesomely murdered with a garden hoe up her genital. The police soon arrived and Ino was taken for an autopsy, and things from here would go from bad to worse. Analyzing her body, the police found semen among other bodily fluids, proving that Ino was raped. And even worse, the hoe that was stuffed deep into her genital went up 60 centimeters to her abdomen, and even puncturing one of her lungs. The police then captured 3 suspects, where one of them was the victim's boyfriend, Ramat Arifin. Ramat and Ino knew each other for about a month, and that one night, Ramat decided to meet up with her in her boarding house. After being investigated, it was realized that Ramat, who was at the time Ino's boyfriend, had the motive to kill her. This is because Ino rejected him and he wanted sex. Ino refused her boyfriend's advances that day because she was afraid of being pregnant. At the time, Ramat and Ino's relationship was not recognized by Ino's parents. It's worth noting that Ramat went to Ino's boarding house because he heard that Ino's parents had a marriage plan for her with another man, and Ino was willing to go ahead with that plan. At first, all Ramat wanted was one last meeting and a goodbye kiss. Ino agreed, believing that no harm would come from fulfilling such an innocent request. This was the reason why she invited him over to her room at her women-only dormitory. But that night, the two of them were practically alone at the boarding school because it was quite vacant. And this was when Ramat wanted more than just a kiss. He wanted sex. Ino refused him just when Ramat began to undress her. This angered Ramat so much that he left the house and then came back with 2 other men he just met that night. The 3 men then barged into Ino's room and began to do the unthinkable. They then began torturing her and taking advantage of her, and to prevent her from screaming, they covered her face with a pillow and grabbed a fork from the kitchen. They then used the utensil to scar Ino's face, and the other person also took a garden hoe. After realizing that Ino was still able to resist and fight back, the culprit that grabbed the garden hoe hit her in the head with it. After they were all done, one of the culprits shoved the garden hoe handle first up Ino's genital, as far as it could go, and the handle then stopped when it hit the cervix. And because that was not enough, one of the culprits then kicked the blade part of the hoe as hard as he could, impaling Ino, killing her. Luckily, the police tracked down all 3 young men and they were arrested just a few days later. This case really is just a sickening read and very unsettling to know about. Some of these murders in different countries are just so brutal I can't wrap my head around them. There's also pictures of Ino's body at the crime scene, but I really don't recommend looking them up. I just think it's worth noting. What really angers me about this case is that Ramat was only sentenced to 10 years in prison for doing this, since he was a minor and the other 2 men were sentenced to death. Rest in peace to Ino. She did not deserve this at all, and this case really rubs me the wrong way.
This is by far one of the worst ways somebody has ever died, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture.
This is Sebastiank22, and he became the most radioactive man in history after a lab accident. On September 30th, 1999, the 34-year-old Hisashi and 2 other co-workers were working at the Takamura nuclear plant in Takamura, Japan, and they were put on an extremely tight deadline by their superiors. The plant converted uranium hexafluoride into enriched uranium for the purposes of nuclear energy. This usually involved a carefully timed multi-step process, but Hisashi and his co-workers attempted to take a shortcut to meet their deadlines. But sadly, this turned into a horrific explosion of uranium solution that turned into a nightmare for Hisashi. The plant underwent emergency evacuation, and the 3 men were immediately rushed to help. They all had been directly exposed to harmful radiation, but to different degrees. The sole survivor of the group was exposed to 3 sieverts of radiation. The second one was exposed to 10 sieverts of radiation, and Hisashi was exposed to a whopping 17 sieverts of radiation, which was way more than any other human in history. And by the time Hisashi arrived at the hospital, his body was already covered in burns, and his eyes were leaking blood, but his agony had just begun. 3 days after the accident, Hisashi was transferred to the University of Tokyo Hospital. Hisashi's lack of white blood cells and his non-existent immune response prompted experts to try a number of procedures to save him. Doctors tried countless skin grafts and blood transfusions, and even stem cell transplants. But sadly, none of these seemed to work. Hisashi soon cried out, "I can't take it anymore, I'm not a guinea pig." just after 1 week of treatment, but although Hisashi begged for his death, his family insisted that doctors kept him alive to keep trying experimental treatments. Hisashi's skin began to melt off of his body, and even after this, his relatives ordered his doctors to do whatever it took to keep him alive. All in all, Hisashi was kept alive against his will for a disturbing 83 days. And at one point, he suffered 3 heart attacks in just 1 hour. And following the guidelines from his family, the doctors resurrected him again and again and again. Every time he died, he came back and suffered extreme brain damage. And on December 21st, 1999, Hisashi finally died of his last heart attack after multi-organ failure, and it was only then that his torture stopped. You really can't fathom the amount of pain this man was in until you see the photo of him. He doesn't even look human and kinda looks like an insect. The radiation poisoning is that bad. I don't recommend looking the photo up, but if you do, while you're looking at it, keep in mind he was kept alive for 83 days in this state. Could you honestly imagine what was going through his head and what his body was feeling? This is something straight out of a nightmare, and may Hisashi rest in peace.
This is by far one of the most sickening murders in American history.
This is the Watts family, and in the early hours of August 13th, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts murdered his pregnant wife Shannon by strangulation, and right after this he murdered his 2 young daughters who are 4 and 3 by smothering them with a pillow, all while they begged their dad not to kill them. He then buried Shannon in a shallow grave near an oil storage facility, and he then dumped his 2 children's dead bodies into an oil tank. Christopher Watts initially maintained his innocence in his family's disappearance, but was arrested on August 15th after confessing in an interview with detectives to murdering Shannon, and he then later admitted to murdering his children. He did this because he wanted to run away and start a new life with the girl he was cheating on his wife with. And he thought the solution to this was to kill his entire family. There's also this clip of him being interviewed by some news outlet, and in the video he's begging for his wife and children to come back. Now at this point, nobody has any clue that he killed them, but he does. He remembers exactly what happened, he knows that they're dead, he knows how he killed them, and he's still on live TV begging them to come home, saying he can't live without them. Just watch this clip, it's absolutely sickening.
My last question, if you have any of them, so feel free to step in. My last question, if your wife can see this, if she can watch this, what would you like to tell your wife and your kids?
Shanann, Bella, Celeste, if you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
That's it. I can take that mic off.
This mother sold her 5-year-old daughter to have sex for $200, and this case is absolutely gut-turning.
Shania Davis, who was 5 years old, was reported missing in North Carolina on November 10th, 2009. Suspicion turned to a man described as her mother's boyfriend, but he was let go and police targeted another man spotted on hotel surveillance footage holding the child. Authorities then arrested Shania's mother and accused her of offering her daughter for prostitution, hoping Shania was still alive, but fearing the worst. The arrests offered a glimmer of hope that Shania would be found alive. But on November 16th, searchers discovered the girl's body off a road nearly a week after her mother reported her missing. Police acquired horrifying surveillance footage that was released to the public that showed a man carrying Shania Davis through a hotel. And that man's name is Mario McNeil. The video footage shows him carrying Shania the day she went missing. And Mario McNeil then turned himself into police and he was charged with kidnapping. But he refused to help find Shania's body. Shania Davis's mother, Antoinette, was then arrested and charged with human trafficking for allegedly selling her daughter as a sex slave. Police still hoped 5-year-old Shania Davis would be found alive, but that hope was dwindling. And sadly, a couple days later, the body of 5-year-old Shania was found. The autopsy revealed that Shania was raped and then strangled to death by Mario McNeil, who was sentenced for murder and sentenced to death. Her mother, Antoinette, was sentenced to 17 years and had to register as a sex offender for at least 30 years. Antoinette literally sold her daughter to Mario McNeil to cover a $200 drug debt, And she said, quote, "He was only supposed to have sex with her." Mario didn't kidnap Cheyenne. Her mother literally gave her to him. And what Mario McNeil did to poor Cheyenne is insanely disturbing to wrap your head around. This is the last image of Cheyenne alive being carried out of the hotel by Mario McNeil. This case is just absolutely awful, and people like this deserve to be under the jail or dead. Rest in peace to Cheyenne, you did not deserve this at all.
These are murders everybody should know about, and this is a massive trigger warning.
This was 8-year-old Gabriel Fernandez, who was born and raised in Palmdale, California. And he was abused and tortured over a period of months by his own mother and her boyfriend. Gabriel lived with his grandparents until 2012 when his mother Pearl Fernandez regained custody of him despite concerns for his well-being from the family. And throughout his 8-month stay in the household of his mother Pearl and her boyfriend, he was systematically tortured and abused. The abuse included regular physical beatings causing broken bones. He was also being forced to eat cat litter and feces, his own vomit, spoiled and expired foods, and he was being burnt with cigarettes and heated spoons. Also, he was shot with BB guns in various areas of his body, including the face and his groin. They also pepper sprayed him and forced him to wear women's clothing, and had him sleep bounded and gagged in a very small cupboard. His teeth were also knocked out with a baseball bat, and according to Gabriel's siblings, when Gabriel's mother and her boyfriend were abusing him, they would just laugh about it like the evil humans that they are. Prosecutors said that Gabriel's mother and her boyfriend were motivated to abuse Gabriel because they believed he was gay. And on May 22, 2013, Pearl Fernandez called 911 reporting that her child Gabriel was not breathing. Gabriel was fatally beaten by his mother and her boyfriend after failing to clean up his toys. When first responders arrived, they found him on the ground naked with several injuries. Paramedics then rushed him to the hospital where doctors declared him brain dead. And Gabriel died 2 days later on May 24, 2013 at the Children's Hospital in Los Angeles. He died at just the young age of 8 years old. And the official autopsy declared that he died from blunt force trauma that coincided with neglect and malnutrition. Gabriel's mother was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and her boyfriend was sentenced to death. This is definitely one of the most sickening cases you will ever hear about or read about. I can't imagine the pain and trauma Gabriel Fernandez was going through while being tortured by his own mother and her boyfriend. And this was just complete abuse. They were treating Gabriel like he wasn't even human. I wish the mother got the death penalty too, but life in prison isn't good either. But rest in peace to Gabriel. This case is just gut-turning and you did not deserve this at all.
Whatever you do, never say this poem out loud, because if you do, you might die.
There is a cursed Japanese poem called Tomino's Hell, and many people believe that if you read it out loud, you will die or be cursed for the rest of your life. One of these deaths was Shuji Terayama, who made a movie after this poem, and exactly 1 week after the movie was released, he suddenly just dropped dead to everybody's surprise. Another time, this college girl was dared by her friends to say the poem out loud. And she did, and exactly 1 week later, she suddenly just died. The poem is right here, and for it to even work, you have to read it in Japanese. So all of us English speakers are on the safe side. Or so I think, but I'm not reading this out loud in English either. Now, you can read it in your head and nothing will happen to you, but you literally cannot read it out loud. This is a very cursed poem in Japan, and many people believe it to be 100% real. So I don't know about you, but I'm not reading Tomino's Hell at all because I'm not risking anything.
These are the most disturbing deaths caught on audio, and this is a massive trigger warning.
What you're about to see and hear is a simulation of what happened to Alaskan Flight 261, following a catastrophic loss in pitch control, killing all 88 people on board. This is real audio footage from the plane going down between air traffic controllers and the pilots. The plane went completely inverted, meaning it was flying upside down, and just listen to how calm the pilots are. This is absolutely disturbing, and can you imagine being a passenger on this flight while the plane is completely inverted?
Alaska 261, we are in a dive here. Alaska 261, take it. We're at 26,000 feet. We are in a vertical dive. Not a dive yet, but we've lost vertical control of our airplane. Alaska 261. We're at 23.7 request. We got it back under control there. No, yeah. Alaska 261, take condition. 261, we're at 24,000 feet. Kind of stabilized. Blowing here.
This is the scariest story about the peephole, and this story is absolutely disturbing.
A 15-year-old girl named Donna lived with her father in a very small house. Ever since her mother died, Donna had depended on her dad for literally everything. One morning, Donna's father was leaving for a business trip and he told her he wouldn't be back until later that night. And with that, he kissed Donna on the cheek and left. Later that day, Donna got home from school and did some homework and then relaxed and watched some TV. The clock then struck midnight and she noticed her father still wasn't back. So Donna decided to just go to bed. That night, Donna had a dream. She found herself standing on the edge of a busy highway. She then looked across the highway and saw a familiar figure standing there. It was her father, and his hands were cupped around his mouth trying to yell something to her. But Donna couldn't figure out what her dad was saying. She also saw that his eyes looked very sad, and he seemed to be desperately trying to communicate with her. She could barely make out the words he was saying, but it sounded like he was saying, "Don't open the door." Suddenly, Donna woke up to a tapping noise. Then suddenly, somebody rang the doorbell. Donna then got out of bed, got dressed, and then scrambled down to the front door. She then looked through the peephole and saw her father's face outside. He was staring directly at her and the doorbell was still ringing. "Okay, hold on, I'm coming," she shouted. She pulled back the deadbolt and was about to unlock the door when she suddenly stopped. She then looked through the peephole again and noticed there was something very off about her father's expression. His eyes were wide open and he looked very terrified. She then slid the deadbolt back into place and said, "Dad, did you forget your keys?" But the doorbell just kept ringing. "Dad, answer me," she said, but the doorbell continued to ring. "Dad, please, I need you to answer me. Is there somebody else out there with you?" But there was no answer and the doorbell continued to ring. Donna then yelled at the top of her lungs, "I'm not opening this door until you answer me." The doorbell continued to ring and her father did not answer her desperate cries. For the rest of the night, Donna sat in the corner next to the door crying and helplessly listening to the doorbell ringing over and over again. She then eventually fell asleep, and in the morning when she woke up, she noticed it was very quiet, so she got up and went over to the peephole. She then looked through it and saw her father still standing there staring. She then opened the door and was confronted with a sight that filled her with absolute horror. Her father's severed head was hanging from a nail above the door, and there was a note attached to the doorbell, and in weird sloppy handwriting it read, "You are a very clever girl."
This is Perfection, one of the worst videos on the dark web you should never go looking for, explained.
Okay, so Perfection is a dark web video nobody should go looking for or even want to see. The video shows a woman peeling her nose and entire face off with a potato peeler, with literally zero expression or pain on her face throughout the entire time doing it. After she completely peeled off her face and nose, her jaw was just hanging down because there was no support from the cheeks anymore. There is a story about 3 friends who watched the entire Perfection video and 2 of them ended up dying. Many reports say that while watching the Perfection video, it somehow hypnotizes you and you end up doing what the girl did to herself and dying. But luckily for all of us, this video is literally impossible to find. It's extremely hard to find on the dark web, which means it's virtually impossible to find it on the normal web. This is honestly a video I would even stay curious on, because it comes from the dark web for starters, and it's extremely and utterly awful. Nobody knows who the girl is or why she's doing this to herself, and nobody knows who even made it. But the stories surrounding the video saying people get hypnotized and end up peeling their own face off and dying make it 100 times more scary, and should make you not want to watch it or even look for it. Perfection is regarded as one of the most unsettling and disturbing videos on the internet, and the mysterious origin and story of it make it truly an internet mystery.
These are murders everybody should know about, and this is a massive trigger warning.
This was 17-year-old Junko Furuta, and on November 25th, 1988, Junko left school and was walking home but sadly never made it home that day. She was kidnapped by a group of young men, including a 17-year-old who was identified as Joe, and would later be given the surname Kamisaku. They kept her captive in the house that was owned by Kamisaku's parents, and that was the beginning of her 44 days of torture. Her abductors had no grudge against her, and there was nothing specific they were after. They just attacked her and abducted her because they could. The group repeatedly beat, tortured, and raped Junko. They also invited other men and teenage boys over to the home and encouraged all of them to take turns on Junko. They shaved her pubic hair, they forced her to dance naked in front of them, and also touch herself in front of them. They left her on the balcony in the middle of the night with little to no clothing. They inserted objects into her private parts, including a lit match, a metal rod, a bottle, and force-fed her with large amounts of alcohol, milk, and water. She was also forced to smoke multiple cigarettes at once and inhale paint thinner. They even lit her legs and arms on fire with lighter fluid. By the end of December, Junko was severely malnourished after being fed only small amounts of food and eventually only milk. And due to her severe injuries and infected burns, she became unable to go downstairs and use the toilet, and became confined to the floor of the room she was in. Junko's appearance was drastically altered from the brutality of the attacks. Her face was swollen, and it was difficult to make out her features. Her body was also very crippled, giving off a rotting smell that caused the 4 boys to lose sexual interest in her. On January 4th, 1989, Junko's captors lost a game against another person the night before, and they all decided to take their anger out on Junko. They poured lighter fluid on her body and set her on fire. Junko made attempts to put out the fire but gradually became unresponsive. They continued to punch her and ignited a candle and dripped hot wax on her face. They placed 2 short candles on her eyelids and forced her to drink her own urine. After she was kicked, she fell into a stereo unit and collapsed into a fit of convulsions. Since she was bleeding profusely and pus was emerging from her infected burns, the 4 boys covered their hands in plastic bags, and they then continued to beat her and dropped an iron exercise ball onto her stomach several times. The attack reportedly lasted 2 hours, and Junko eventually succumbed to her wounds and died. Less than 24 hours after her death, the boys were extremely scared of being penalized for murder. So the group wrapped her body in blankets and shoved her into a travel bag. They then put her body into a 55-gallon drum and filled it with wet cement. On January 23, 1989, 2 of the boys were arrested for the brutal crimes against Junko. And believing his friend snitched, one of the killers then told the police where to find Junko's body. And the following day, the police found the drum containing Junko's body. I would show the picture of the bin she was in, but it is pretty disturbing and I don't want to show it on here. But if you want to look it up for context, you could. This case is by far one of the most sickening murders ever, and it just goes to prove that there is so much evil in this world. This poor 17-year-old girl went through 44 days of hell, and I could only imagine the psychological and physical pain she went through. Rest in peace to Junko Furuta, you did not deserve this at all.
These are the worst of the worst videos on the internet explained, and today we're talking about 3 Guys, 1 Hammer.
Before I begin, I just want to say never go searching for this video. 3 Guys, 1 Hammer was leaked to a United States shock site in 2008. On your screen right now are the killers. The video begins with a man riding a bike down the street, when the killers kick his wheels and strike him with a hammer off the bike. The poor victim was just going for a normal bike ride, but it ended up turning into one of the most brutal murders ever. They then take the victim into the woods where the victim is lying on the ground, and it's very clear the victim has already taken a lot of damage. He is semi-conscious and clearly has been struck in the head and face with the hammer. The video then continues to the 2 boys taking turns smashing the victim's face in with the hammer. And the victim's face is progressively getting worse and worse. It's as if you got a pack of strawberries and just stomped on it. That's exactly what his face looked like. It was completely caved in and red and was 100% unrecognizable. There was blood bubbles as he tried to breathe, his face was just completely mangled and smashed. And if I'm not mistaken, they also put a cardboard box over his head. And the worst part is, the victim was in and out of consciousness throughout the entire video. Also, the sound of him trying to breathe with all the blood and his disfigured face is absolutely horrible. The killers continue hitting the victim's face with the hammer. They then take out a screwdriver and begin stabbing the victim in the stomach countless times. And then the one killer takes the screwdriver and begins stabbing the victim's eyes out, all while he's still alive. The victim then tries to cover his eyes, which shows that he is still conscious, which is just so unsettling to watch. The killers put this guy through pure hell. I could only imagine the fear, loneliness, and the pain the victim must have been experiencing. Eventually, the killers got bored and just wanted to finish the job. So they hit the victim in the head with the hammer a couple more times extremely hard, which ends up killing the victim. Another disturbing part that stands out to me in this video is that at one point you can hear a car passing by, which turns the killers completely quiet until it passed. And once it did, they just continued brutally murdering the victim. The victim's name was Sergei Yatsenko, and he was just a normal guy going through his normal day, when these demons decided to do this to him. It's just pure murder with no motive at all. Whatever you do, don't search for this. It's not the gore that makes it awful, it's the pure evil that these kids possessed. Because why in the world would you do this for fun? Rest in peace to Sergei, and it's crazy stuff like this happens.
This is by far one of the worst cases in human history, and this is a massive trigger warning.
This is the murder of Christine Siluan. She was from the Philippines and was a volunteer in church, and she used the church every day from 4 to 6 p.m. On the day of her murder, she went to church as per her schedule, but she didn't come home after that. Her parents then started to worry, and they began searching for her with their neighbors. And what they found was absolutely horrid. They found her body in a farm where half her skull was sliced like a piece of pizza, and her face was literally skinned down to her skull. Also, her brain was completely destroyed by acid. The police then started investigating, and they checked the cameras and found out that she was with a guy. The people started protesting about this case, and the case was given to special officers. They had a lot of pressure on this. A week before this happened, Christine broke up with her boyfriend, so the police took him into custody. And he was proving he was home all day when she was murdered, but officers were completely tired of this case, and they then sentenced him as the murderer. But after a few months, a thief was caught in a store where he confessed he murdered and raped Christine. He said he started talking to her on Facebook with a fake account and was using fake photos of another guy who was pretty good looking. Christine fell for the guy, and she assumed that he was about 20 years old, and they started texting daily. One day, they both decided to meet up at 6 p.m. near the church she went to. But upon arriving, Christine noticed that this was not the guy she was talking to, and this guy was around 40-ish years old. She then refused to talk to him and tried to go back, but he held her hands extremely forcefully, and then took her far away from town and raped her repeatedly. He then put iron rods inside her personal organs and then cut her face in half, and then skinned her whole head down to the skull. And to make it even worse, he put acid inside of her head. The autopsy also revealed that her tongue, trachea, esophagus, parts of her neck, and right ear were missing. The self-proclaimed killer of this case, named Renato Lanas, said that he used barber-type scissors and stabbed her 30 times on different parts of her body and skinned her face. Christine Siluan was only 16 years old, and this case is extremely haunting. There's a picture of her body in the field they found her on, but Google did a really good job of not showing it and hiding it. So even if you do go looking for the picture, I don't think you're going to find it. This is one of those cases that after you get done reading about it, you just feel some sort of uneasiness. I feel so bad for Christine's family, and I can't imagine finding my daughter in this state. May Christine Siluan rest in peace.
These are the worst of the worst videos on the internet explained, and today we're talking about the Pitbull video.
The video that I'm about to explain is extremely graphic, and I don't recommend searching for it. This is a cartel execution, and the video begins with the victim lying on his back on the ground, and 2 men are holding his legs open. He's being restrained. And in total, there are 5 cartel members, 1 victim, and also 2 pit bull dogs. Apparently, this is the victim's punishment for allegedly doing something with a kid or to a kid. The victim is naked, and at the start of the video, the dog has done most of the work. The dog already ripped the man's privates off, and it's just a bloody mess. The dog continues to rip pieces of flesh off where the victim's privates used to be, and the victim is being held down, and he is also being gagged so he can't scream. But sometimes the gag came loose, and at that point you can hear the man scream in absolute pain. The victim was even talking, but I couldn't translate it, but that means he was completely conscious during this, which I can't even imagine the pain. As a man, this might be one of the worst videos out there. Funky Town is bad, Ghost Rider is bad, but as a man, I can't imagine anything more painful than a pit bull ripping your junk off while you're still alive. Not many people mention this video with the other disturbing ones, but it's definitely up there. There's not any information about the victim after the video. I don't know if he died, but it's safe to assume he did. He lost a lot of blood, and if a dog eats your privates, you will most likely get an infection and die from it. All in all, this video is very graphic, very real, and very disturbing. Please do yourself a favor and never go searching for this video, especially if you're a man.
These are the worst of the worst videos on the internet explained, and today we're talking about Miss Pac-Man.
The video that I'm about to explain is extremely graphic and sad. Whatever you do, do not look it up. The video is about 1 minute long and it starts in a dark room, and the first thing you notice is the screaming in the background. The camera then pans to the floor, revealing a severed hand, and it then pans to the bed which Sebastiank22 is on. The bed is soaked in blood and Sebastiank has had both of her hands cut off. And at this point you can see the full extent of her injuries. Sebastiank had been hit in the face so hard with the machete that she had a horizontal wound going across her face that was so deep it actually reached her ears. The wound was halfway up her face, right in the middle of her nose, and it was horizontal, hence the name of the video, Miss Pac-Man. Because the wound was so deep it looked like an exaggerated mouth, and it looked exactly like Pac-Man. But the disturbing thing is, Sebastiank is still alive at this point. At this point, you then discover the screaming in the background isn't hers, but actually someone else in the house. And according to rumors and reports, it's actually her children. The camera then pans to her face and it shows she is still aware and conscious. Her eyes move across the room in complete pain and fear. You hear her struggling to breathe due to the insane amount of blood, and you hear her constantly gurgling as she tries to hang on to her life. You also hear her try to breathe, but due to the injury, it's extremely muffled. It almost sounds like a young baby crying. You also hear a male's voice behind the camera. Now the question is this the neighbors who discovered her, and if so, why in the world are they recording her? Or was it her partner who was responsible for this brutal murder? The camera stays in Sebastiank's face for about 30 to 40 seconds and you see her withering in pain. You hear her trying to scream, and at one point the camera goes closer to her wound and you see just how deep it really is. It's literally 3/4 of the way down her head. This is a very hard watch and completely disturbing. Although you don't see the awful act committed on camera, seeing the aftermath is completely traumatizing. Sebastiank was sadly pronounced dead after this video was taken. This video is considered one of the worst, and its brutality is compared to Funky Town. Nobody knows how this video ended up on the internet, and it remains a mystery to this day. Please, whatever you do, never search for this video or picture. It's way different than a regular cartel video I explained, and it's more of a real-life horror movie, a complete living nightmare for those in the room. Rest in peace to Sebastiank22. This is absolutely sickening, and you didn't deserve this at all.
These are pictures with horrifying backstories, part 5.
This is a picture of James Holmes holding a gun before taking the lives of 12 people at a movie theater. In 2012, he entered a movie theater in Colorado. He then set off tear gas grenades and then shot at people in the audience. This picture is just absolutely sinister. Next is a picture of serial killer Dennis Rader walking his daughter down the aisle at her wedding in 2003. And at this time, he had murdered at least 10 people in Wichita and Park City, Kansas. He was nicknamed the BTK Killer, and these killings took between 1974 and 1991. The crazy thing is, his daughter had no idea about her dad's sinister double life. Next is a photo of 19-year-old Kayako Washino. She's posing before boarding the doomed Japan Airlines Flight 123 on August 12, 1985. She did not survive, and out of 524 people, only 4 survived. This picture shows 2 turbine workers trapped at the top of a turbine after a fire broke out. This picture is just extremely chilling. Here you can see them hug each other one last time. One jumped and one burned. This picture shows NYPD officer Christopher Amorso helping a woman on September 11, 2001. He helped many victims that day. He was last seen entering the North Tower to help escort people out, but sadly, he never exited the building. Rest in peace to this hero, and he saved many lives.
This man got sucked into a plane engine, and whatever you do, don't look up the video.
This is the Air Astana 2004 incident, which is one of the most shocking and tragic events in the history of aviation. The victim was Igor Yefimov, and he was sucked into the plane's engine while he was working near the aircraft. The horrific incident occurred on July 13, 2004, and it was captured on CCTV video. And the video has recently resurfaced on the internet, sparking renewed interest and curiosity among the viewers. Igor was a 26-year-old maintenance engineer, and he was preparing the aircraft for a flight from Moscow when the engine suddenly turned on and he was then sucked into the engine of the Boeing 737. Right when this happens, he completely disappears and blood and body parts go everywhere. All over the airport runway is bits and pieces of Igor, and it's an extremely disturbing sight. The video is extremely shocking and gory, and I really don't recommend looking it up. 1 second Igor was there, and the next he was just completely erased. I never really understood the power and how dangerous plane engines are until I saw this video. We all heard about wood chipping incidents and workplace incidents, but somebody getting sucked into a plane engine is definitely a first for me. Again, I want to say I don't recommend looking it up or watching it, but if you do, this is a massive trigger warning.
These are the worst of the worst videos on the internet explained, and today we're starting with Funky Town.
Before I begin, never look this video up. This is a massive trigger warning. The video begins in some sort of room and music is playing. The first song that plays is Sweet Child O' Mine by Guns N' Roses. And the camera pans to the victim on the floor with plastic wire. And the torture had already began before the video started, because the victim looks like he's already been through complete brutality. His hands have already been cut off and his face has been completely flayed, which means skinned. There is no skin on the victim's face at all, and his eyes have been gouged out. And there is an insane amount of blood all on the floor. But the most messed up part about this is that the victim is hooked up to some sort of IV, and the IV is pumping him with drugs to keep him alive. And completely aware, making sure he feels everything that is happening to him. At the start of the video, they try and slit his throat with a farming sickle and press it against his jaw. But when the victim begins to scream, they shove a box cutter in his mouth to shut him up. His screams are absolutely gut-turning. They kept going from screams to gurgling, from screams to gurgling. As the video progresses, they take the box cutter and slit his throat about 40 times. And keep in mind, the victim is still alive and aware of everything because of the drugs they are giving him to keep him alive. Also, the cartel members are mocking and laughing at the victim the entire time. They then continue to try and slit his throat with the box cutter and were going at his neck numerous times. All while the song Funky Town was playing in the background, hence the name of the video. The cartel members kept having to physically restrain the victim, meaning that there was still a lot of life left in him. And the amount of pain he had to be in is completely unimaginable. At one point in the video, a cartel member has his foot on his chest holding him down, and another time they shoved a pole in his mouth holding him in place. But the worst part about the video is towards the end, where the victim manages to loosen his arms from the restraints and immediately tries to touch his face. But remember, the victim has no hands to feel, no face at all, and no eyes to see. The victim was most likely in so much shock that he likely forgot he had no hands, but instinctively the victim still tries to touch his face. It's absolutely horrifying, and the video then concludes. Also, keep in mind the victim was still alive when the video ended, so who knows what else they did to him before he died. Because they were just keeping him alive to torture him. What makes Funky Town so horrifying besides what happens in the video is the mystery behind the video. We don't know the victim's name, we don't know why he was being tortured this way, or what he did. The only thing that we do know is that it took place in Mexico, and it's extremely horrifying to watch. You can make an argument that nobody has ever been tortured this bad in history. Funky Town is definitely one of the worst videos out there, and I don't recommend watching it ever. But to start off this series, Funky Town has the first spot.
This mother killed her 3-year-old daughter because SpongeBob SquarePants told her to.
If you've never heard about this, you might want to. On September 17th, 2022 in Michigan, a police officer named Gerald Sobolewski received a call from a man inside his sister's residence claiming that he found a human foot. So the officer then immediately drove to the residence, and when checking the back room, he found 2 garbage bags with one of them having a human foot sticking out of it, and unfortunately in one of the bags was the body of 3-year-old daughter Sutton Moser, who was stabbed multiple times before being stuffed into the bag. Police immediately got a search team together to find Sutton's mother, and eventually they did find her, and she was passed out in a random graveyard. Turns out the 22-year-old mother named Justine Johnson was the culprit who stabbed and murdered her 3-year-old daughter, and was therefore immediately arrested by the police. When asked why she did it, it was later revealed that she was experiencing hallucinations from heroin withdrawals and not sleeping for approximately 2 weeks. So on the day of Sutton's murder on September 16th, 2022, Justine was hallucinating while watching SpongeBob SquarePants, who apparently instructed her to kill and take her daughter's life. She also said that if she didn't do what she did to her daughter, that they would kill her, and said she was afraid for her life and lost her mind. This case is just shocking and absolutely disturbing, and how could SpongeBob convince you to kill your own daughter? I guess she was hallucinating, but still, this is just absolutely crazy to wrap your head around. Rest in peace to Sutton, you did not deserve this at all.
This is by far one of the most disturbing carnival accidents caught on camera explained.
In 2014, a terrible accident occurred at an amusement park in Orlando, Florida, resulting in the death of a 14-year-old boy. The incident took place at Orlando's Icon Park, where the free-fall ride stands as the world's tallest freestanding drop tower, towering at a height of 430 feet. The victim, Tyrese Sampson from St. Louis, Missouri, slipped out of his seat during the ride. The primary cause of the accident was an operator error. The operator manually adjusted the seat restraint opening to accommodate Tyrese's weight, which was over 300 pounds. As a result, the restraint opening was nearly double the normal range. During the ride's descent, Tyrese slipped through the gap between the seat and the harness and tragically fell to the pavement, suffering fatal injuries. The autopsy revealed that Tyrese had numerous broken bones and internal injuries. His weight exceeded the ride's manual weight limit of 287 pounds. Now I'm going to explain the heartbreaking video. So if you ever been on these rides, you know how they work. It slowly brings you up to the top, and then it drops you down, and then you stop kinda halfway when you get to the bottom. But as the ride slowed and came down, the momentum of it stopping threw Tyrese out of his seat, and you see him being flung to the ground at a pretty fast speed. And seconds later, you hear his body hit the pavement floor. And it might be one of the most disturbing sounds you will ever hear. The best way I can describe it is the sound of a watermelon hitting the concrete from a high up distance, and just exploding all over the place. You hear the disturbing splatter sounds and the bones breaking, and you also hear the sound of the blood coming back and hitting the ground after the initial hit, meaning that poor Tyrese's body just exploded. The video is absolutely disturbing, and as always, I do not recommend looking it up. I just thought I'd include it to give you guys some context. But nonetheless, this heartbreaking incident highlights the importance of strict safety protocols and proper operator training in amusement parks to prevent such tragedies in the future. This is just so sad and heartbreaking. Tyrese was so young, may he rest in peace.
These are deaths caught on audio, and this one might be the worst one yet.
Before I begin, this is a massive trigger warning. This black box recording captures the moment that the deadliest aviation accident in history took place. Japan Airlines Flight 123 departed Tokyo with 524 people on board. The date was August 12, 1985. 12 minutes after takeoff, the pilots broadcasted a distress signal, and the plane then experienced a rapid depressurization which put the crew and passengers at risk for hypoxia. This causes organ and cell death due to inadequate oxygen. They were experiencing a system failure. The disturbing final words caught in the cockpit prove that the pilots understood their fate and there was nothing they could do. They lost complete control of the aircraft. The mind-blowing thing is, when the plane crashed into Mount Takamahara, it registered as a shockwave on a seismometer at a Japanese university. 520 people died, and not all were instant. Several people survived the initial crash but died while waiting for rescue. And the only 4 survivors suffered extremely serious injuries. Here is a recording of the plane going down. This is a trigger warning and viewer discretion is advised.
This is going to be the most disturbing cartel video I ever explained, so this is a massive trigger warning.
This is really one of the worst things I'm ever going to explain on this channel, so whatever you do, never look it up or search for it. I honestly couldn't even watch it. The video that I'm about to explain was released in the summer of 2021, and the motive behind what happens in the video is unknown, but it is thought to be a rival cartel related killing. The video is 4 minutes long and it's filmed in the middle of the day in a jungle location. Many refer to this video as the Venezuelan butcher shop. As you play the video, you see a man who looks to be in his 30s squatting on the ground with multiple men talking in the background. A man then points a pistol at the victim's head and pulls the trigger. The victim is still moving, however, and he is then shot multiple more times, and at this point the victim is dead. A cartel member with a machete then enters the shot and begins to hack away at the victim's neck to decapitate him. And after a couple strikes, the head is cut clean off. The cartel members then move on to dismembering the victim's arms. One member holds the arm as another cuts it off. Once again, after a couple strikes with the machete, both arms have been cut off. At this point, the cartel members then move on to the victim's legs. And just like the arms, one member holds the legs up as the other hacks away at them. Other cartel members can be heard chanting and talking in the background. One of the cartel members then takes one of the severed legs and begins beating the victim's corpse with it. The victim's body parts are then thrown in what appears to be a well. The cartel member with the machete then takes the machete and cuts vertically down the victim's torso, from the top of his chest to the abdomen area. And this is where the video gets absolutely disturbing. After a cavity has been made, multiple men in a very, very disturbing scene begin to grab handfuls of the victim's guts and organs and proceed to throw them in the well. They then cut what is left of the victim's body in half and cut above the hips, and in a matter of seconds they cut the victim's body in half. The rest of the hips and legs are then thrown into the well. The cartel members then butterfly what is left of the torso. They slice it down the middle and pull the ribs apart, as well as removing the heart. One of the cartel members then holds the heart up to the camera, which is still beating. All of the cartel members then take turns holding the heart. Two of the men then play tug of war with the heart. Then what is left of the torso is then thrown into the well and the video finally concludes. In a matter of a couple minutes, this man's body was viciously dismembered, gutted, and completely destroyed. This is honestly one of the most disturbing videos on the internet, and you should never want to see it and you should never look for it. I honestly didn't even watch it fully. I just read descriptions of the video because it's that brutal. I will never understand the ruthlessness in this world, and this video just goes to show how disturbing our world actually is.
This disturbing story that I'm about to explain might make you never use Tinder ever again.
In November 2017, the woman you see right here, whose name is Cindy Loof, was swiping aimlessly on Tinder until she matched with a woman named Audrey. The two agreed to meet on their first date on the night of November 14th. Everything was perfect, and Sydney even took this picture before she went on the date, saying, "Ready for my date." On their date, they shared life stories and a bunch of laughs. But things took a turn for the worse at the second date when Audrey asked Sydney to go into her apartment. And as a result, Sydney never returned home. Sydney's family knew something was wrong when she didn't text them for 4 days and her pet cat wasn't fed. So as a result of all this happening, they immediately called the police. Unfortunately, a couple days later, Cindy Loof's body was found. Her body was brought to the morgue in 6 different garbage bags because she had been cut into 14 pieces while a part of her upper left arm was never found. After police investigation, the police found it very odd that 51-year-old Aubrey Trail and 25-year-old Bailey Boswell posted videos on Facebook claiming their innocence when the police were never even questioning them. It turns out that this couple is using the pseudonym Audrey on Tinder to lure Sydney into their apartment and recruit her into a cult. And the only reason Aubrey Trail dismembered Sydney's body and removed her organs was because he panicked after she accidentally passed out during a sexual fantasy. Aubrey Trail was convicted of first-degree murder and Bailey Boswell was facing first-degree murder. And this picture right here is the last known image of Cindy Loof before she was brutally murdered by her Tinder date. Or in this case, she thought it was her Tinder date. All in all, this case is extremely disturbing, and rest in peace to Cindy Loof. It also goes to show that you have to be careful when you go on dates with strangers. You never truly know who somebody really is in this disturbing world.
These are the worst of the worst videos on the internet explained, and today we're talking about the diving face split video.
The video that I'm about to explain might be one of the hardest things to watch on the internet. Whatever you do, never look it up. This video was released onto the internet in July 2009, and around September 2009, the video went completely viral. The video shows a group of teenagers having fun on a summer day. The group is taking turns jumping into the sea from an elevated surface, and it looks like the drop is about 20 feet high. The first person to jump off dives into the sea completely fine and unharmed. The second teenager is then ready to jump. He stands over the drop and readies himself and then jumps. But as he jumps, he kind of loses his footing and completely slips. And immediately the jumper realizes that he is in deep, deep trouble. In midair, you can hear him panicking as he realizes he didn't clear the clearance he needed to. He then falls into the sea, but his face hits the fishing walkway below. And immediately when this happens, everybody he was with lets out an ear-piercing scream. As the video plays, the victim's unconscious body is floating in the water, and the water around his head immediately turns red. The video then cuts forward and it shows a rescue boat trying to save the jumper. And during this part of the video, the entire sea is completely red with the jumper's blood. The video then jumps again to the victim in the hospital, and at this point you can see the true nature of his injuries. And I'm telling you right now, it's horrible to look at. The victim's face was completely split vertically from the top of his forehead all the way down to his chin. And what makes this even worse is that he's still alive throughout all of this and fully conscious. During this point of the video, you can see the doctors try and hold the victim's face together. And apparently the doctors were doing this to help the victim's breathing, because his face was split in two, both his nose and mouth were completely destroyed. And as I said earlier, he was still fully conscious. Despite the injury, another disturbing part about this video is that you can see the victim's eyes darting across the room in complete shock, pain, and panic. One of the doctors can also be translated to saying, "Where do I even start? Where do I even start?" Meaning this injury was so brutal that experienced doctors didn't even have a clue on what to do. And sadly, the victim passed away 2 days after the freak accident. Again, I urge you to not look up this video because it's definitely one of the worst accident videos on the internet. The video is just horrific, and may this boy rest in peace.
These are deaths caught on audio, part 3.
This is Christine Chubbuck's final news report. On July 15th, 1974, Christine delivered what was believed to be a typical news report for her news station. Her segment was known for ad-libbing, so the people around her had no idea what was about to unfold. During her report, she covered 3 local news stories that involved violent crimes. At the end, a video of fellow anchor Bob Peterson was set to play. But the reel jammed. She continued nonchalantly apologizing and citing technical difficulties. But what the people on set didn't realize was that Christine had pre-written her own script. After reading her own words, she quickly drew a gun and used it on herself. As cameras disturbingly continued rolling. An alleged audio has been released of her report. People were skeptical about how real it was, but the words matched the police report perfectly and her voice sounds almost identical. I have to censor portions specifically for TikTok, so take a listen.
Sorry, for those of you who saw late night weekend news watch last night, we did have a film report and a commentary by Bob Peterson. Unfortunately, we had technical difficulties and cannot bring it to you now. However, do watch tonight at 5:30 and we'll have that story for you then. As of this morning, Race Foster, who was shot in that incident, is in satisfactory condition at Sarasota Memorial Hospital. In keeping with the WXLT practice of presenting the most immediate and complete reports of local blood and guts news, TV40 presents what is believed to be a television first. In living color, exclusive coverage of an attention.
This is by far the craziest video of 2024.
This is a video that has gone viral in the past couple days in which a father or mother's boyfriend is threatening the son to shoot him, and he does. The video opens up with the father or boyfriend pointing the gun at the son. He can be heard saying, "I'm going to blow his effing brains out right now." The mother then comes over and pulls the father away, screaming, "No, no, stop." The father then walks away and the son then says, "Blow my brains out." The father then comes back into the room screaming, "You want me to?" while pointing the gun at him. The son flinches at this point and turns away and says, "Shoot me, I dare you. I guarantee you go to jail for life." The mother then shuts the door and you hear the father saying, "I'm getting ready to blow his brains out and yours. I'm sick of this," to the mother. The son then gets up and opens the door. He then says, "You're going to blow my mom's brains out?" The father then points the gun back at the son and fires. Everything goes silent as you hear the mom gasp. The camera then faces the floor and you hear the mom repeating, "Did he hit you? Did he hit you?" And at this point you see blood droplets hitting the floor. Once this happened, the mom screams, "Oh my god, you're going to jail." The son then runs out of the house and shuts the door. The video then ends. Luckily, the bullet only grazed the son's ear and he survived, and the father or mother's boyfriend then went into the backyard and ended his own life. Probably because he thought he killed the son with that shot. I don't know what caused this whole situation, but it had to be brewing for some time for the man to snap like this. You can find the video on Twitter, and it has over 25 million views in just a couple of days.
This is by far the most disgusting death of all time, and whatever you do, don't look up the picture.
This took place in the small village of Miyakochi in Japan, and what happened at a school there that year would shock generations. It was February 28th, and school teacher Yumi Tanaka was about to make the most disturbing discovery of her life. At about 5 p.m. that day, right before she was about to leave and go home, she decided to go and use the bathroom. And when she entered the cubicle, she noticed something she never saw before. Inside the toilet bowl was a black shoe. Now, the way the toilets worked back then was that the individual toilet was connected to a small sewer tank. So she was confused on where the shoe came from. So she decided to investigate further and peep her head inside the sewer tank. And what she discovered scarred her forever. Inside the tank were a pair of human feet. Upon discovering this, she let out a blood-curdling scream and her co-workers came to her aid. Police came and discovered that the feet were connected to a full body in the tank. They tried to remove the deceased human from the pipe, but it was extremely difficult. Firefighters and a crane had to come to assist moving the body, and eventually it was pulled out. The person inside was a dead male, and at this point was covered in feces, and his cause of death was from hypothermia. The man was later identified as 26-year-old Naoki Kano. It was determined that he was dead for 3 days, and it seems that he voluntarily got into the toilet pipes. They came to the conclusion that he likely squeezed himself inside in an attempt to spy on women using the toilet. This is just disgusting and weird in so many ways, and why in the world would this man do this? There's really no pros to it, and there's just cons. I really want to know his thought process behind this.
This is by far one of the worst war videos ever explained.
The video that I'm about to explain will shake you to your core, and I don't recommend looking it up. The video depicts the execution of a so-called Russian spy by a Ukrainian soldier. This video is said to be from the early months of the Russian and Ukraine war. The victim in the video was allegedly a Ukrainian man feeding information to Russian forces, but there isn't any concrete proof of this. The video itself is short and it's around 1 minute long. It appears to be recorded in an apartment block on a staircase. As you play the video, you see a soldier and his captive kneeling in front of one another, and the captive has a bag over his head. The soldier takes the bag off, and he then takes a knife that looks like a bayonet, and he then pushes the victim's head back against a wall and then drives the blade into the victim's left eye socket. He pushes the blade in as the victim grimaces in pain. He then pushes the victim to the ground so that he has better leverage. He then uses his palm to essentially hammer the blade deeper into the victim's eye socket. The victim is still somehow alive, but he still hasn't made a sound. The killer then takes the handle of the blade and appears to shake it or pull it out, and at this point the victim lets out a scream that you can't describe. He wails in pain as the sound echoes throughout the apartment block. The screams are honestly borderline traumatizing. The killer continues to jiggle the blade and the screams turn even worse. At this point, the killer resumes using his palm to hammer the blade deeper into the victim's head. He hits the blade handle twice, each time pushing the blade a centimeter deeper into the eye socket. And on the second palm strike, the victim stops making noises and it appears he goes limp. It seems he drove the knife through the victim's eye and into his prefrontal cortex. The video is luckily hard to find, and it seems to have been wiped from the internet, and no mainstream networks ever covered it despite it being an obvious war crime. I don't recommend even trying to search it. There's no point, and you are better off staying curious. This video is absolutely awful.
Audio Part 2.
This disturbing aircraft disaster claimed the lives of 70 people, and it was the result of a couple pieces of duct tape. The audio in this video may be disturbing, so this is a trigger warning. On October 2nd, 1996, a Boeing aircraft departed from the Lima airport in Peru at 12:42 a.m. Near immediately, the basic flight instruments began behaving erratically. The pilots became confused as they began receiving contradictory emergency alerts. Unfortunately, the plane was over the ocean in the pitch dark night, and neither the pilots or air traffic control were aware that their displayed altitude information was wrong. They were dangerously close to the ocean and had no way of knowing. Inside the cockpit, it was total chaos. Several alarms were blaring constantly. The left wing then clipped the water, causing several feet of it to break off. The pilots acted quickly and got airborne for 22 seconds, but the damage was done. The plane rolled over and smashed into the dark waves. Everybody on board died, many of which likely drowned with the aircraft. It turns out when the plane was being polished, duct tape was placed over the static ports, which measures ambient air pressure and are imperative for other systems to function. The employee didn't use the standard bright colored tape and it was missed and left on. This, along with being pitch dark and being over the ocean, made it near impossible to see how close they really were. Just take a listen to their final moments. It's absolutely disturbing.
2 miles to rain. 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 2 miles to rain.
¿Qué hacemos con tren? No se ve que estamos impactando en agua. Dale, perdida.
2 miles to rain. 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 2 miles to rain.
Nos vamos a invertir.
This disturbing video has been shocking people for years.
This video is about a woman named Nikki who becomes possessed by a ghost while doing a makeup tutorial. The video begins with Nikki normally introducing herself and her makeup tutorial. However, a little bit into the tutorial, the left side of the screen changes and Nikki immediately starts staring directly into the camera. And at this point, it gets extremely disturbing. Nikki then starts banging her head against the table and blood splatters everywhere. After this, she sits in the chair dead still with a swollen face and one eye twitching, while a lot of blood pours down her face. This video is meant to be a horror story, and it is very effective at creating a sense of suspense and dread. The use of close-ups and sudden changes in the video are particularly effective at making the viewer feel uncomfortable. The video also plays on the viewer's fear of the unknown, as it never fully explains what happened to Nikki or why she becomes possessed. This video has been praised by some for its originality and its ability to scare viewers. However, it has also been criticized for its graphic violence and its potential trigger to viewers with mental health problems. The video is just a work of fiction. It is an acting performance that is meant to be scary and suspenseful. It is not a real depiction of a woman being possessed by a ghost, but the video is so realistic it sends chills down your spine. Now, when I first watched this video, I thought it was 100% real and I didn't know it was fake. The video is so realistic that if you go into it thinking that it's real, you're going to believe it 100%. Many people still believe this video to be real, but it has been proven to be fake. Either way, it's still an extremely hard watch just because it's blunt force trauma and she's doing it to herself. And the way she looks after she bangs her head on the table multiple times is absolutely stomach turning. Still, I don't recommend watching this video, but if you do, I'm just warning you right now, it is pretty disturbing.
These are deaths caught on audio, part 1.
On January 26, 1967, 3 crew members were conducting a launch rehearsal at Cape Kennedy Air Force Station Launch Complex. The launch was scheduled the following month. The simulation was needed to determine whether or not the spacecraft would operate normally. And because the spacecraft wasn't loaded with fuel, it wasn't considered to be a dangerous exercise. At 1 p.m., the command pilot Gus Grissom, senior pilot Edward White II, and pilot Roger Chaffee entered the command module in their pressure suits. Immediately, Gus noticed a strange smell circulating throughout his suit, which he compared to sour buttermilk. The crew was going through their checklist when a violent fire broke out, and all 3 men's microphones caught it all. Just take a listen. It's also worth noting that there are aftermath photos of all 3 astronauts, and they are very bad. I really don't recommend looking them up.
This is flaying, one of the worst forms of punishment explained.
Flaying truly is one of the worst ancient methods of torture and execution, and many cartel organizations still use it to this day. So let me tell you what it would be like to be skinned alive. First of all, you're in for a bit of a process. Human skin just doesn't slide off your body. You would need to be tenderized a little bit. Either you will be placed in the sun all day until you're burnt to a crisp, or dipped into boiling water. Which one would you prefer? But sadly, that's not even the worst part. Instead of having time to recover from your smoldering pain, the flaying process will begin. The skin on your face will be sliced off first, because it's the easiest and the most accessible. The cut will extend beneath all layers of skin just above the muscle. After, small punctures will be made all over your body to score the flesh. Then, very long, thin pieces will be cut and peeled off of you, like you're just some kind of fruit. You will feel every single nerve ending as it is dissected, and these nerves extend into even your deepest layer of skin. This horrific torture will go on for hours. Death will come from blood loss, shock, hyperthermia, or infection. Your skin is an organ that keeps in heat and keeps out dangerous bacteria, and without it, you cannot survive. You would then be forced to enjoy your agony up to an entire day before your system gives out. This is just awful, and can you actually imagine this happening to you?